Drawing on years of experience as a clinical psychologist, Dr. Julie Smith,
numbing your emotions with things like food, alcohol, drugs, sooner or later, it's going to find its way to the surface.
Likely bestseller, dominating the book chart.
This book, Open When, is my hand reaching out to yours.
In this conversation, we get real about the struggles we all face but don't always want to talk about.
Human nature has amazing ability to weather the storms, and we think that we might not be able to survive, but a lot of the time we do.
Your ability to cope or the depths of your strength are far beyond what you allow yourself to imagine or what you're able to imagine.
How to stop feeling jealous of others.
I think sometimes the signs are really subtle with friendship. That's what makes it difficult. I'm giving this friendship as much as I can. It doesn't seem to be coming back.
And the unexpected strength we discover when life tests us in ways we never imagined.
When you actually do that thing that makes you scared, it does give you that inner resilience. It enables you to grow.
When you face your fears and you look back on that event, it feels quite poignant and you look back on it with such a fondness. It was difficult, but it gave you something.
I wonder about comparison and ways in which we can use it as a good thing.
I too have had sort of personal experiences with this.
You have your wonderful new book, Julie, which is called Open When. So I'm excited that you're back on A Life of Greatness for a second time.
Thank you for having me. It's really great to see you again.
And I love this book so much because I just think every single chapter relates to something in someone's life. And when I was reading it, it was like, oh, yep, that relates to something I've been through. That relates to something else I've been through. And I have no doubt that everyone that will read it will think that. But you start off the book and you say something really interesting. You say, you know, in the trials that lie ahead, I have high expectations for you because I can be sure of two things. First, that you have potential beyond anything that you could comprehend. And when I was reading that, it made me actually think about the fact that a lot of us think, if that happened to me, I would be a complete wreck, or I could never go through that. Like when you see that happen to someone else, something tragic or bad. But I feel that human nature has really the very amazing ability to weather the storms, and we think that we might not be able to survive, but a lot of the time we do. And I'd love you to talk about what you think.
Yeah, and there was a kind of a key reason really why I put that into the beginning of the book, and it's really because the work that I did with lots of people, I say it's people of all ages, but I specifically remember some kind of younger people that I was working with who came into therapy, and from what I could see, the biggest problem was that they believed they wouldn't be able to cope with it. When they anticipated something coming up in the future, the belief was, I won't be able to cope. I won't know what to do. I won't be able to deal with it properly or in the right way. And really that was the core of what was holding these people back, was that they didn't believe in their own ability to deal with life's ups and downs, or manage their own mental health, or know what to do with emotional responses. And once we were able to work on that, and they were able to acknowledge that your ability to cope or the depths of your strength are far beyond what you allow yourself to imagine or what you're able to imagine. So you don't really know ever in your life how strong you could be until you get there. And inevitably, when things happen that you imagine you could never cope with, you find your way through. And then that's where your confidence in your own strength comes from adversity, right? So you look back and you go, wow, I never imagined I could get through something like that. And yet here I am. And now I have this extra little bit of confidence that, you know, if something difficult or similar to that happens again, I'm pretty sure I could do it again. It would be hard, but I could. So I think you kind of discover your strength. It's because a lot of people will often anticipate that they just won't know what to do and they won't be able to cope, and that'll be the end of it.
And, you know, even something as simple as, say, public speaking, I know that a lot of people look at people who do keynotes or things like that and think like, I could never do that. Like, it's just not, I wouldn't be able to cope. I'd melt. I can't memorize things. I get embarrassed. I look at people in the crowd. I just could not do it. And then they work themselves up to getting to the point and they do it. And then from that day on, next minute, they've got all this confidence and they're like, I've got it. Because when you actually, as you mentioned, do that thing that makes you scared or deal with a situation you never thought you'd have to deal with, but it's life and things happen, it does give you that inner resilience and it enables you to grow.
Yeah, and do you know what? I got an invitation yesterday to go on my sort of local radio station, and that was actually the first radio station I ever went on. And I remember it was when everything was taking off and, all my videos were going viral and the book was going crazy. And this local radio station invited me on and I was terrified. I remember my heart pounding on the car on the way up there. I was shaking when I went in and I just, it was just this huge, or felt like a huge event. And that was a few years ago. And since then, I couldn't count the number of times I've done radio or live television or those kind of things since. And so when they invited me to go on again, I said, yeah, of course. I feel really, I think when you face your fears, when then you look back on that event, it feels quite poignant and you look back on it with such a fondness because you realize it was difficult, but it gave you something in yourself, and it sort of unlocked a part of you that allowed you to move forward and face new fears and try new things. And now I won't be afraid to go on. I'll be excited and I'll enjoy it because I've given, because you learn through evidence, right? If I hadn't had that first experience, I wouldn't have had the evidence in my mind that I could do it and it could go okay. And it wasn't the best radio appearance of all time. It was okay for a beginner. And then the next time I did something similar, that was okay for a beginner too. And then each time I learnt and tried different things. And when it didn't go quite right, I realized I could survive that too. And when it went well, that felt great. And so now, it's the idea that the thing that you do every day becomes your comfort zone. While I don't do it every day, if you do something often enough, your comfort zone sort of expands to encompass that thing, because your brain gives you a stress response when you're doing anytime that you're doing something that's new, unpredictable and novel. You get that stress response in order to help you do it. So your brain is saying, I can't predict what's going to happen here. I can't automate this for you. So you need this increase in your level of alertness so that you can be aware, watch out for what might be coming around the corner and perform. And so as soon as you start to do something on repeat, your brain realizes you don't now need so much of a stress response because you roughly know how you're going to deal with it and you can predict what's coming. And so that's why we call it habituation, but your body calms over time when you do something on repeat.
It's so interesting you say that because for many years, and I actually write about this in my own book, I just out of nowhere had this fear of flying, and I used to get very panicky before, the feel of like claustrophobia. And it wasn't that I thought the plane would crash, it was that I could not get out of the plane if I wanted to, because, that might happen. Anyway, so I would be waiting to get onto the flight and I could feel my heart start pounding, and then I'd be sitting there and I'd feel more comfortable if I knew there was someone traveling with me. And, and you hate feeling like that. And especially when you're in a job like yours and mine, when you're in the media and you have to travel a lot, it becomes quite terrifying thinking like, I've got to go on a flight and why am I stressed about this? And then I really learned how to box breathe, and that gave me really this agency to be able to take care of myself and be able to slow my heart rate down. And now I get on planes and I either do the box breathing, or what I found now is I actually, to your point, don't need it because my brain has changed and my mind now goes, oh, you've done this so many times without feeling anxious, and I don't get that rush that I used to, that now I don't even need the breathing anymore. And I noticed that recently on the flight home from Bali, where I was just completely fine. It's so good.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And that's such a great example of that whole thing, isn't it? That your brain will adapt to whatever you're doing at the time. And I always thought that, where growing up, I always had a fear of heights. And then me and my husband went to New York. He bought tickets to go at the Empire State Building, and I remember cursing him on the way up as we're in the lift, and I could feel my ears popping because it was so high and things like that. And the lift sort of comes up in the center of the building, and you're in the middle of the gift shop, so you have to kind of work your way through the gift shop to get to the outside and have your photo on the edge. And I just sort of took my time. I gradually moved towards, so I sort of worked my way through the gift shop, getting closer and closer to the outside, but each time just giving myself a chance to take a breather, do exactly that, do box breathing and 7-Eleven, that kind of thing, to just keep that heart rate sort of at an even keel. So I wasn't relaxed at any point, but I just made sure that I wasn't allowing it to escalate and become panic. So just kept bringing it down. And when I was calm enough, I could take a few more steps to get to the, closer, and then do the same again, a few more steps. And so when you're facing your fears, you don't have to do the worst case scenario straight away. You can do whatever feels most manageable in that moment. And like you said, if it's something like flying, you might use distraction, if that's the most effective thing at the time, or the breathing, or having someone with you. And then when you've done that enough times, the stress response calms enough that next time you perhaps don't need someone to come with you. So it's okay to sort of do it really gradually, step by step. And when we sort of treat phobias in therapy, we'll create a list of so a graded list of fears. So you'll have that worst case scenario at the top. I don't know, if it's like a social anxiety thing, it might be, okay, the worst case scenario is going to a huge wedding where I don't know anyone. And right at the bottom, that sort of least scary thing might be, oh, I have to speak to the person in my local convenience store when I buy, my stuff. And you don't start with the worst case scenario. You start at the bottom with the thing that gets that heart rate going, but you could manage it. It's just not comfortable, and it's not pleasant. And you do that, and you repeat it again and again and again. And what happens is that falls away, and then you focus on the next thing and the next thing. And in therapy, we never really have to get to that worst case scenario, because as you start to work your way up, you build such a confidence in your ability to cope with stuff that you start to fear the other things less. So yeah, you never really have to do that kind of flooding of, let's put you in the worst, the things they do on TV and stuff, where they put people in the worst case scenario, the sort of, I'm a celebrity, get me out of it, put you in a box of spiders and then hope that you feel better about spiders.
Yeah.
You never have to do that kind of thing, because over time you become less and less bothered about the thing that you were scared of.
It reminds me, sorry to laugh, of a story. It was terrible. My mum told me, where I was young, and our pet dog, I think she had like a trainer around, and the trainer was really hardcore, and they had a pool, my parents at the time, and the trainer got the dog and just like threw our dog in the water and was like, this is how you teach it to swim. It's good. And my mum's like, the dog's never swum before. And of course, like, it knew how to swim. But we're like, who just gets the dog and throws it into the water like that, So I think your technique is a lot better.
Yeah, that's a sort of true case of flooding, isn't it?
Yes.
Just like straight in at the deep end, boom. I'm glad the dog was okay, though.
The dog was fine. The dog was absolutely fine, but I don't think they would ever do that again. You have a wonderful chapter in your book about comparison, and I don't think you have to look far to realize that comparison is the fastest way for anyone to feel not good about themselves. It's the fastest way to misery, but it's something that we all do. And this is actually advice I give to a lot of friends of mine, and I've taken it on myself over the years, where, using social media as an example, I have made sure that anything that might trigger me, or anything that just doesn't feel right with me, that I just don't follow it anymore. Because it's, why would I put myself through that? And a lot of friends, as I said, have done it, and they feel that there's a big weight that's lifted off their shoulders after they have kind of done that, because maybe a lot of the time they don't want to get off social media altogether, but they feel like, not having to see that thing that triggers them makes them feel a lot better. But I wonder what advice you have to give about comparison and ways in which we can use it as a good thing, and ways that we can channel it to not allow it to make us feel so sad and upset.
Yeah, I think something I've sort of talked to people about online before is exactly that idea of kind of unfollowing things that you realize are having an impact on you. And I guess that demands initially the awareness of the impact of certain content that you're putting yourself in front of, or putting in front of you. But I think there's some stuff out there that kind of says, just stop comparing yourself, just don't do it, and stuff like that. And it's pretty much impossible, given that we are social beings, we live in groups, we live in communities. So our ability to compare ourselves and our tendency to compare ourselves to others is actually really, really helpful in living in groups. Because if we never looked around us and asked ourselves, am I kind of living up to the values of this community? Am I sort of living in line with expectations of this community, those kind of things, then we inevitably would be a pretty terrible neighbor, pretty terrible person to be in a relationship with, all of those sorts of things. So the ability to do that, and our tendency to compare, is really helpful and helps us to be a decent person for other people. It helps us to stay safe in our communities and not be kind of rejected by them for getting it wrong. But in this kind of modern world where we're bombarded with essentially marketing material, so all content is, everyone's selling you something, and we don't necessarily see that in the beginning. Our attention is just drawn to something, and we've made that comparison before we've even had a chance to think about whether it's a decent comparison or not. And so that's where the unfollowing things is a helpful, it's just one way of trying to minimize the types of comparison that are going to be unhelpful for you, because social media comparison is possibly the worst kind of comparison you can make, right? It's not anyone that probably not anyone that it's not even someone who's on a kind of level playing field to you. It's someone who has a completely different life, completely different set of circumstances. They're also not showing you the full story. You're getting what they want you to see so that you essentially buy something from them. So it's just not helpful. It all leads into this kind of narrow funnel of envy and jealousy and feeling inadequate and not enough in some way. But when we're looking at, okay, well, what do we do about that? It's really kind of looking at being aware of when you have that tendency to make a comparison. Are you making a comparison that is going to help you in your life, or the opposite? Are you making a comparison that's going to hinder you, make you feel worse, or make you spend money that you don't have, or whatever it is? And I think the comparisons that are most helpful are those where it's based on your goals. So if there's something you're working on, let's say you want to master, I don't know, tennis, and you could go online and look at all the best tennis players in the world and probably feel, oh, maybe I shouldn't even bother with this sport because, I'm a beginner. I'm never going to get there. Or you could go to your local club. You could find someone who is maybe a couple of steps ahead of you in their kind of learning experience. You could look at, okay, well, I want to improve my, backhand, and theirs is pretty good. I'm going to look at exactly that, just that part of their game. What is it they're getting right that I can learn from to help me on my path? See, that kind of comparison is so helpful because it enables you to be inspired by other people, learn from those people, and then add it to your toolkit to advance your own life and and improve something that's based on your goals for yourself, as opposed to, Joe Bloggs down the road is such a better person than me, and I can never be like that. I can never be that good, or those sorts of global attacks on your own personality. Really, those kind of things that are based on something you can't really change, or things that are just going to make you feel terrible. So keeping it really concrete, focused on your goals, not anyone else's or what anyone tells you should be. Those kind of things can actually be really helpful. But it's about just being aware, I think, of the difference between a comparison that's not helpful and a comparison that is, because you can then use comparison to your own advantage.
It's true. I remember years ago, before I had this podcast, I was very much into, personal development work. And I really looked at what Oprah was doing in that space. And I admired her so much for her putting herself out there and the topics that she was talking about, because it was all very new, and she's good like that. She I think she's just been through the fires that many times with people criticizing her. She doesn't even care now. She's more like, I'm going to serve, and if this is going to help people, whatever. And I thought it was really brave, and I liked what she was saying. And I thought, not only did I learn from her, but I thought, she inspired me to do something similar. But I was never jealous of her or envious of her. I was very inspired by her. And it's very easy, kind of to your point, where there's that switch of looking at someone and it being jealousy, or looking at someone and being inspired by them. And I wonder what the difference is.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is around whether you're in a sort of fixed mindset or not.
Yeah.
So, if you have your status as a beginner and you see that as actually just a personality trait. So maybe if you're just starting out in, I don't know, the podcast world, and you look at someone who's, got the best podcast in the world and they've been doing it for 15 years, and then you kind of don't acknowledge that they are much further along on their journey than you are, and that they started where you are. That's when you make the false assumption that you're on the level playing field,
Yeah.
and you're not. And so I think acknowledging in that comparison how much further along on their journey that person is, and being willing to be the beginner at something, and acknowledging that with effort you can improve. And I think as soon as you always hold that in mind, that okay, with effort and time and learning and trying things out, that I can get better at this, there is potential for improvement, then you can feel inspired. Whereas I think if you feel like, well, this is my lot and I'm just not good at this because it's difficult at the moment, then you kind of lose that hope of anything improving in the future. And then you just see it as set in stone. Well, Oprah's great at this, but I'm, on my second episode, and finding it really difficult. Doesn't acknowledge that Oprah probably found it really, really difficult on her first and second episode of, the first things that she did. And that's when we just feel hopeless, that, we feel like we're never going to get there. So I think that's a big thing, is acknowledging the potential for improvement with time and effort, which again is that growth mindset stuff.
What if people find themselves jealous, envious of people that they actually know, where they might be looking at someone and, I don't know, they're jealous of the way that the other person looks, or they're jealous of what the person has. How does one deal with that?
Yeah, I talk about this in the book because I think it's such a dangerous ground when you start to compare yourself to someone that you're in a relationship with, whether it's, someone in your family or your extended family even, or a close friend. As soon as you start to see yourself as in competition with that person, then it's going to be so destructive on your relationship, because that means you're setting it up in a way that means you can't both win at the same time, that their successes somehow mean your failure, or that you're not keeping up with them. And any kind of friendship or family relationship just can't be based around that. it can't be, if every time they succeed, you feel terrible because you're competing with them, that is, just going to be the worst thing for your relationship. It's going to tear it apart pretty quickly. And they will notice eventually that they're in some sort of competition they didn't sign up for. And they'll feel that they can't share their successes with you because they'll realize your reactions to that. Or it would just begin to kind of break things down. So I think when we start to feel envious toward or jealous towards someone that we know, it's time to reassess, and it's time to look at, okay, what are my values and what is it I want for my life in terms of the type of person I want to be and those sorts of things. Because when it's something that's just happened for someone, so maybe they, I don't know, they were just fortunate in some way that hasn't happened for you yet. Then you're basing it on things you can't control too, aren't you? You're sort of, you're looking at, okay, well, I want that to happen for me, and that's fine. It's okay to feel that way, as long as you then are able to come back to, again, your life, your values, what you want for you, so that you're not focusing in on them and the distress that's causing you. Because once you lose the relationship as well, you've both lost out.
Yes, that's so true. I want to talk about relationships because I know that is a big part of your book. And, you talk about this idea of, people and sometimes being envious of you or the other way round. And I think that can get into a very murky situation also, where people feel that they have to be friends with someone because, I hear it quite a bit actually, like, I've known them my whole life. Okay, does that make you like chained to them? Like, you've grown as a person and all you do is say how much, this person's annoying you or they're doing this or that. Like, why you keep being friends with them? Like, that kind of, like, I will start getting irritated when I've given people advice and they, say that. But I wonder, going back to the envious thing, even for me, I found that when my profile started raising, I noticed with some people that it was hard for me to talk to them about my successes. And I know when I remember getting a book deal, I found it very hard to tell a friend of mine. Like, I waited for ages because I just did not want to upset her, because I cared for her and I knew it would hurt her. And in hindsight, I'm like, well, why did I do that? You know what I mean? As in, like, why was I so worried about telling her? She's supposed to be my friend. So I would love your take on that and the idea of this kind of like needing to hold on to friendships even when they're probably not serving you as the one person and then the other person as well.
Yeah, I mean, I too have had sort of personal experiences with this. And you're kind of told, aren't you, that you learn about people when you're having hard times, but you also learn a lot about people, possibly more about people when good things happen to you.
100%.
And I think those sorts of experiences for me made me think more about how when we were kids, we were taught about how friends are forever and, forever friends and all this kind of stuff. And that's a lovely idea, but it doesn't really account for how people's lives change, people's values change, people go off in different directions. They have different experiences, and sometimes people just start behaving in a way that isn't healthy for the friendship anymore. Sometimes what was a friendship that, maybe you went to school with someone and so you've been friends for so long, that you don't really enjoy spending time with them anymore. Maybe you don't feel safe around them anymore. Maybe it's one of those experiences where you can't really share your successes, or maybe you can't even share your more difficult times. Maybe when you reach out for some kind of connection, say, oh, this terrible things happened this week. Maybe it's met with a sort of competitive, oh, well, something happened that's worse, for me. And maybe that then bid for connection is squashed. And I think sometimes the signs are really subtle with friendship. That's what makes it difficult, is there isn't this sort of one big thing that suddenly makes you think, this person doesn't have my best interests at heart, actually. Often it's subtle. It's kind of drip, drip, drip over months or even years, where you just start to realize that this person isn't for me. They don't look out for me. I can't trust them to be there for me. I don't think they want the best for me. And even though I'm giving this friendship as much as I can of myself, it doesn't seem to be coming back. And maybe being accepted in that friendship is dependent on you being kind of small enough for the other person to be able to tolerate you, or it might not be small enough, it might be something else enough. You might have to adapt who you are in order to be acceptable to that person, in a way that makes you compromise your own values or be dishonest about who you are. And that's not true friendship. That's not healthy friendship anyway. And I think that's the thing, is it's one thing having friends, and we talk about how important friendships are to a healthy and happy life, but it's not just friendships. It's healthy friendship. It's good quality friendship, good quality connection with people we trust, that makes the difference in our lives. And so, something I talk about in the book is that it is okay to make that decision about a friendship, however long you've had that friendship. If it's unhealthy for you and if it's damaging for you, it's okay to, and it's a big decision. I tell people, don't act on impulse, because it's your life, and it is a long-term friend. So when you get to that point that you've made the decision, do you know what, I'm going to move away from this person in some respect, be so clear in the reasons you've made that decision, that you can sit with that. And because you will miss them at some, there'll be something about the friendship that you miss, even though you might have made the decision that's best for you. And also kind of, you don't end that friendship in bitterness, or sort of send them on their way with compassion, that you always wish the best for them, but just acknowledge that it's not necessarily healthy for you anymore. So maybe you're going to kind of see them less, or not trust them with personal information anymore, and those kind of things.
It's interesting, a girlfriend of mine chose to let go of a friendship that she'd had for a very long period of time. And, it took her a long time to come to the decision of letting go. And then when she did, she said this one line to me that I'll never forget. She said, "You know what, Sarah? I feel like I can just breathe again." And I thought, God, that's so interesting, where a friendship gets to a point where it can be so suffocating, what it had been for her, and toxic, I suppose, in a sense. And even though there was not one big thing that happened to her and her friend, it was almost like 1,000 cuts, and she made that decision, which was hard, and she was getting rid of a long-term friend, but it felt like a weight off her shoulders. And I think if anyone's listening and they're in this situation, know that there are plenty of people out there that are good, that are, going to be great friends for you, that you haven't met yet. And a lot of us change over time. And when we evolve, we're not the person we used to be. And if people are relating to, Sarah when she was in grade 3, Sarah's not in grade 3 anymore. She's evolved, and sometimes they have not. So letting go of friendships is sometimes absolutely a necessary thing if we want to kind of move forward in our life. Because, as you said, community is important, but not a community of people who don't make you feel very good about yourself.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think also something I mentioned in the book is about how it's also important to think clearly about what we're bringing to the friendship as well. What we don't want to kind of promote is that sense of, well, you know, as soon as a friend is not living up to your expectations, or saying what you want them to say, then get rid of them. And that's not really what I'm saying. It's about part of that equation has to also include, am I bringing to the friendship something that contributes to them too, and am I doing what I can to make the friendship better and make it healthy, and am I also being a good friend to them? And so you have to kind of, and that's really difficult stuff it's really difficult to be honest with yourself about how you might be able to improve. And sometimes it's, you know, someone can be on a destructive path, and then they vilify the friends who are brave enough to say, this is not the way for you, you know. So if someone is on a destructive path, like sort of self-sabotaging and not looking after themselves properly, there will be the friends who kind of yes man them and say, that's fine, it's fine, it's fine, you know, and they'll just kind of watch in their destruction. And there'll be other friends who are, you know, brave enough to say, this isn't what you should be doing. This is not good for you. It's not good for, you know, your family or the people around you. You need to reevaluate here. And that's such a difficult place to be, because you put the friendship at risk, because there is that tendency then for that friend to say, you know, forget you, you're not supporting me, and you're not, you know, being there for me. And a friend isn't necessarily an echo chamber. You know, a really good friend is someone who says, you know, pull your socks up. This is, you know, you need to sort this out here and look after yourself properly. Or I don't know, some kind of silly example might be, okay, let's say you're studying for exams and you kind of come off track with it. There's a career that you really want, but you've got sidetracked with, you know, a guy or something else that's destructive for you. And, you know, not that a guy is destructive, but, you know, maybe, you know, out drinking at the weekends or something, and you've not studied, and so you've failed an exam. One of your friends might say, don't worry about it, you're having fun, do your thing, you know, da, da, da. And your other friend might say, hang on a minute, you told me that this career is the most important thing to you, and it's your dream, and you have, you know, so you haven't studied, so how can I help you have another go at this? Or, you know, what could we do to help you get back on track? Or, you know, what's going on with all this drinking? What is there something going on here that we need to talk about? And they're really, really difficult, uncomfortable conversations to have, because you're putting the friendship at risk if that person back, you know, hits back and says, you know, just leave me alone, I don't want to have that conversation. So it's a sort of fine line to tread, isn't it? And it always involves us kind of questioning, am I being that kind of ideal sort of image of a friend that I have for other people? Am I being that as well for other people?
Totally. It 100% goes both ways. You know, that's what friendship is. So I absolutely agree. You talk about in your book the idea of the relationship that we have with our parents, and an interesting one, which is when we obviously become adults and the way we then relate to our parents. And I find in a lot of the mindset work I do, a lot of my clients will be, you know, very angry at their parents and feel that they are the way they are because, you know, their mother or father treated them in a certain way, and they hold on to these wounds very tightly. And, you know, you understand why some people have a much easier time growing up than others. Some people have parents that can be awfully cruel. So, you know, everyone's situation is very different. But, you know, one thing that I always go back to, and again, you know, I want to underscore with not all parents are like this, but majority are, that they're all just doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have at the time. And even me as a mother of two younger children, know that there are times where I've stuffed up and I have more knowledge now than my parents ever had. And I think, oh my God, what have I done? and I feel that I'm a pretty educated person when it comes to this sort of work. So, we all make mistakes. And I want to read a passage out of your book for you to talk to, which relates to everything I've been speaking about. It says, everyone's parents got things wrong, but some got it a lot more wrong than others. Some children make a smooth transition into an adult relationship with their parents. For others, it can feel like a constant source of pain and confusion. For the majority of this relationship, you have been the child with no control or choice about how the relationship stands. But then that relationship transforms from a child-adult relationship to an adult-to-adult one. But being an adult doesn't necessarily mean you can now have the relationship with your parents that you always wanted. I'd love to discuss that and how we move through difficult relationships with our parents.
Yeah, and I think a big part of something in that passage is about recognizing the relationship that we can have with our parents as an adult. And I think speaking to what you were saying about becoming a parent, when you do become a parent, I think a lot of the anger that a lot of us sort of grow up with in our early adulthood diminishes because it's counterbalanced with a sense of gratitude. When you become a parent and you realize it is the hardest thing you've ever done, and you desperately, desperately want to get it right for this child, but you essentially have very little idea about how to do that. And then, also, even if you have ideas about how to do that, you turn out to be wrong some of the time. And there's new challenges that come up and you never knew how, what was coming or how to deal with it. And then you get it wrong again. And so inevitably you sort of discover through the process of parenting that your parents were also trying to do their best, but had very little guidance on how to do that, or had the wrong guidance on how to do that. Different generations were taught different things. And my mother-in-law was speaking to me the other day, who said that when she was younger, they used to berate you for picking your baby up out of the bassinet because you were seen to be spoiling your baby if you picked them up, and you were supposed to leave them. And now you would be the opposite information, and so all the time you're being sort of told what to do and trying to do the right thing, but not really being sure what, not being told to kind of just trust your own instincts on it. And so, yeah, when you become a parent, there's definitely this shift towards gratitude and away from anger. But that doesn't mean that your relationship with your parents is suddenly healed and okay. It can still be fraught with difficulties and different values and things like that. But it kind of shifts. And really, that is the antidote to the resentment that people can hold, is a sense of gratitude. So if we kind of, if we go through adulthood sort of resenting every kind of mistake that they made and everything that they got wrong and how that's made life more difficult now, that causes us even more difficulty than it would. And so one of the ways to kind of sort of quell some of that resentment is to look at, okay, well, if they're responsible for all of these difficulties, what if, out of my strengths or my abilities and my insights and awareness, which of those came from my childhood too? Because if childhood is the basis of all my problems, then it's also going to be responsible for all the good things. What advantages did my parents give me? When I look back, what am I grateful for? And if I don't know, if your mum was emotionally unavailable or highly punishing, but actually she was always there for you when you got home from school with a hot meal, or she always made sure that she worked hard so that you could have a pair of shoes that fit, and got you to school on time, and that kind of stability. Maybe that was what you felt grateful for, and it wasn't ideal, but it was better than what it could have been. And so sometimes that sort of balanced view doesn't take away the stuff that happened that wasn't ideal, but it helps you to kind of look at it with a bit more, okay, well, maybe my mum saw those things as the most important, so that was what she focused on, and maybe she didn't really have the skills to do the other stuff and come and give me a hug at night and ask me how I was feeling, because maybe that never happened for her. And I think in adulthood as well, we start to realize that our parents also grew up with parents who weren't ideal and had to deal with their own traumas and their own cycles, and they didn't have this sort of world of information and insight from the psychology world that we now have. They were just kind of guessing along the way, and so sometimes that sort of acknowledgement can help us with a sense of forgiveness about certain things. And that's not necessarily accounting for, really, really awful situations where people have suffered in the sort of worst sort of case scenarios. But yeah, I think when it comes to your relationship with parents who might still be difficult to deal with, talking about, in that passage there, it talks about this sort of a relationship that used to be child to adult, in which one of you is entirely dependent on the approval and love of the other person. Having your parents' disapproval at a young age is genuinely a threat to your survival. If you're abandoned by your parents, that's you're not going to do so well. So in early life, it makes sense that you have no power in that relationship, whereas now you're an adult. While that tendency is to slip back into child mode and put them in parent mode as if they need to fix everything and make it better, actually, we have this new power where we have the ability to make things better. But in order to do that, we kind of have to take the responsibility of an adult as well. So that might be, I can't change my mum's really difficult behavior around me, but what I can do is I could put in some boundaries so that I'm seeing her in situations or a small enough amount of time that I know I can look after myself and manage it better. Or, you can put things in place that are very adult things to do, but that make the relationship healthier for both of you. But none of that involves changing the parent, because I think we have to acknowledge along the way that they might still have just as little insight as they ever had. They're a different generation. And acknowledging that I might never have that relationship with my mum where she's the person I want her to be or always dreamt she would be, but I'm going to have the best possible relationship I can have with her within those limitations. And I'm going to, forgive the fact that she's not, doesn't have the insight that I now have the benefit of.
Oh, I love that so much. Why do we feel like, I know a lot of people do this, that when we're around our parents, we go back to the, 14-year-old version of ourselves, even though we might be, your 30s, 40s, 50-year-olds?
Yeah, we do it to each other. So we kind of, it might be very subtle. We might behave in certain ways that then invite the other person to take on their role. So it might be, when you go home to your parents, it might be that you kind of kick off your shoes and sit down on the sofa rather than, while your mum's sort of preparing you something to eat, or, and just those little subtle things that you might have done. You go into that old family home and you might behave in a way that you did, and that's sort of old learning, that's old habits and things like that. But what they do is they create cues for the other person to take on the other role. And you might just behave in ways that you did as a young person, as a child, that invite your parent then to take on that parent role and start, but then the parenting feels domineering. And so you almost can't have it both ways. It's very, it's looking at some of those subtle behaviors and that come right back to the very sort of beginning of that interaction, that enable you to kind of contain that sort of adult to adult interaction, rather than slipping into a role that invites them to then sort of compensate for the behavior.
It's funny, I'll go into my parents' house and my mum, she's the best. I love her dearly. It'll be like a summer's day and I'll be wearing a jacket and she'll be like, why are you wearing a jacket? It's 30 degrees outside. Aren't you hot? And I think, Mum, I've told her this as well. I am an adult. I can regulate my temperature. I think I understand if I'm hot or not, but thank you for pointing that out because, I would have kept wearing the jacket for the next 2 weeks in the 40-degree heat, you think it's just these little things that they do that you go really?
Yeah, and you can see how in that interaction it turns into a sort of parent teenager type interaction,
Yes.
doesn't it? Where you're kind of fighting for independence or something. Whereas if it was perhaps I don't know, like a great grandmother or someone that that had never taken that role with you in the past, you might then see it as, oh, that's so sweet that you're so concerned
Yes.
for me. Thank you so much. You're so cute. And it might lead to sort of a bit of a cuddle and you're so sweet. And rather than that kind of battle for control over the jacket, or and it's interesting, isn't it, when you kind of switch out, if you take that behavior but you switch out different people in your life that have different roles. Like if it was a partner, you might see it as oh, that's so sweet that you're concerned. Or if it was your own child, you might kind of see it differently. And so sometimes when you switch out the person, you see how you might see it in a different light, the same behavior in a different light if it was a different person, and then that your response to it might be better or worse, or lead to different things in itself. So it's fascinating.
I never thought about that before. That is absolutely fascinating. That's a good one to use, actually, if you ever get a bit narky at someone, that if another person said that thing to you, you may look at it in a different way. It's really not that bad at all. So that's a really good one to use. I want to talk about why we find it so hard to ask for help. And when I read that chapter in your book, it made me think of my grandmother, who's 94, who still to this day, she's in a nursing home, but, she's mentally very sound. But she's old, right? So, I feel like if any of us, God willing, got to 94, it's all about asking for help at that age. I mean, you've helped so many others on your journey, but she doesn't look upon it like that. And there'll be situations, and this has been her whole life, where my mum will, because it's my mum's mum, will say that, oh my God, did you know that she spent the whole night sitting in the chair and she fell asleep in her chair rather than her bed because she didn't want to bother the people that work at the nursing home and tell them that, she was finding it hard to walk that day, and she couldn't make it into bed. She didn't want to bother them. And I think, and my mum and I always get really frustrated because we're like, those are what they're there, that's their job. They're there to do that. They probably would love it if you ask them for help. You're not bothering anyone, but she does it to her own detriment. And I feel like there's a lot of people that do that. And I mean, I have never felt like I was a person that was like that. So I'd love to understand why people feel like they can't ask for help and how that can be very detrimental.
Yeah, it can. And it's interesting, as you were kind of describing that situation, I thought about my husband's grandmother, actually, who, when she was in her 80s, she's passed away now, but when she was must have been her mid 80s, and we sort of turned up at her house, and she had these sort of big units, big sort of, like shelves and cupboards and things, like all these things, and they were all in the middle of the lounge because she decided to wipe the walls down. And she was this tiny little old lady, and we were trying to. So you moved these yourself? Why didn't you just call Matthew and he could come round it for you in 5 minutes flat? And but there was just no sense of. And actually, she had managed it, to be fair. But it was that generation, wasn't it? Of no one's coming, just get on with it and do. You can do more than you think you can do, so have a go, and then you discover it. And there is something to be said for that. But also when it comes to that sort of chapter in the book about when it's hard to ask for help, is that kind of situation where you would benefit from the help, and you know things would turn out better for you if you sought the help. So for example, if you notice that your mental health has declined, and you know that it would be more beneficial for you to reach out to someone and start working on it, but it's really difficult to do, and it's that kind of situation where it would be the better outcome if you did it. And when it comes to that kind of situation, I often think it's you not doing the best by yourself. It's you placing, maybe it's it could be different reasons every time, but let's say it's fear of judgment from that person, or a discomfort in the idea of accepting help as well. It's difficult to ask for help. Sometimes it's even more difficult to accept help from someone else, because it makes us feel a certain way that's uncomfortable, and that means you're not doing the best by yourself to avoid the uncomfortable feeling of having to accept someone's help. And certainly in that chapter, I talk about this idea that the only reason we're all here today is because of our ability to give help to each other and to accept it when we need it. And that is the reason we are here, is our ability to collaborate with each other, because we don't really survive that well on our own. It's because we worked in groups, and people had different strengths, and so we relied on each other and our varied strengths to do different things, and we all worked as teams in our kind of small communities and things like that. And there's something about kind of modern life where we don't have those really small communities anymore, where everybody knows each other and everybody takes on a different role that's sort of also valued and helps each other out, and where we feel significant in that, and that it's okay to ask each other for help. We're in these kind of huge societies where you might not know your neighbors or the people around you, or even when you're in that care home, you might not really be that familiar with the staff. They might have a big, it might be a big place with lots of staff. You might not really even remember their name, and so it's a kind of doesn't feel as safe and familiar as it would if you were in a small community with people that you knew really well and were comfortable with. And so it shifts that ability to reach out to each other and ask for help, doesn't it? That if instead of calling your next door neighbor to come round for a cup of tea because you're suffering, that's a whole different ball game to calling up a mental health service and speaking to someone you have never met before and trying to explain that you're struggling. It's this whole kind of shift for sort of human society, really, that makes it hard to ask for help.
What do you think are the best ways if someone feels like they want to start asking for help more, using others to be able to, using as in, like getting help to, be the best version of themselves? What are some little steps they can take?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think it's the little steps. I think you don't have to, you have to kind of reach to someone that you feel would be easiest to reach out to, that you kind of trust. Also, you don't have to tell them everything at once. You don't have to ask for everything at once. You can kind of test the water and tell them a little bit about something, and just test that situation and see how it feels, and see whether that that the response is one that makes you feel safe. But also you have to really dig deep and find that courage to do something for yourself. So people often think about self-compassion as being kind of indulgent, that you kind of, you're being all nice to yourself and you're just making you're kind of letting yourself kind of opt out of things, but it's really not that. So self-compassion is treating yourself as if you're someone you really care about and you have a duty to do the best by. So, often in therapy, we'll talk about this idea of people who kind of struggle to do the best by themselves, even when it's difficult. It's okay. Think of someone in your life that you love without condition. And that's often a child, whether it's their own child or, a niece or nephew or something like that. and then we'll kind of think of that child and how we feel towards them, and then sort of almost visualize them being in a similar position to what you're in at the moment, and then you kind of consider, what would you want for them in that situation? What would you want them to have the strength to do for themselves, and why? And when we kind of think of it in that way, we're able to engage with that compassion that is essentially, the answers are usually, I would want them to have the strength to do that difficult thing that's going to help them to, to get better, or to, find a better place for themselves. And I'd want them to not judge themselves for it. I'd want them to be brave enough to kind of reach out to someone, knowing that they are absolutely worth that effort, and that getting to where they want to get to is worth the discomfort and the pain of getting there. And so when we do that, we can sometimes then engage with that feeling of the compassion, and what we have to do is just redirect it towards ourselves, because it is difficult for, there's nothing, you can go for that kind of easy small steps, but it's still going to be difficult, it's still going to be a challenge. And so you have to acknowledge that you find, bettering your life or improving things for yourself is worth that effort. And so, starting small allows you to have those small victories that then give you that drive to go on to the next thing and the next thing.
I wonder, Julie, what is some of the best life advice that you have ever received?
Oh, wow. The best life advice. Do you know what? The thing I probably use the most, personally, from all the kind of therapy work and the training and stuff, is the values exercises. And it's that difference between setting a goal for yourself, which once you've done it, it's done and it's passed, and compared to a value, which is more of a path that you try to stay close to. A path that never ends, but it's something that you always try to stay close to in your life. And so it's this idea of, okay, in these different areas of my life and the different aspects of it, it's not what I want to happen to me, it's what I want to do, the kind of person I want to be, and how I want to show up in that area of my life. And so you create these sense of values, or this idea, and life will inevitably at some times pull you away from that path, and you'll deviate from it. But if you're aware of what those values are, then you can sometimes, when you have that horrible feeling like, oh, everything's just not feeling as sort of I don't have that drive or that motivation that I once had, or I'm not feeling that sense of joy for my life anymore, or a sense of purpose, then inevitably what that is that you've drifted away from certain values and things that are important to you. And then you can steer back towards that path and carry on, and things start to feel different. And so I will often do a sort of simple values exercise that I include. I think I've included it in both books, actually, because I find it so helpful. And it's the idea that you can just quickly on paper map out the different areas of your life, kind of parenting, marriage, friendships, career, lifelong learning, creativity, all of those things, health. And you kind of just block out in each box, okay, what are those things? What are my values? What's most important to me in this area of my life? And then you can kind of look at, okay, if this area of my life is really, really important to me, how much am I living in line with that at the moment? And if you're not living in line with it, but it's really, really important, then that's an indication of something to focus on next. And that really just guides me, I think, because life pulls you in different directions. If I feel like things are out of balance in one way or another, then I can just pull it back. And that's just been a really kind of centering, grounding tool for me to use all the way through.
That's so useful. I wonder, Julie, what is something that you wish for yourself?
What do I wish for myself? And my immediate thoughts go to health. I dealt with some health problems this year. I had a run-in with an early stage breast cancer this year. So that coming face to face with your own mortality is pretty huge experience. And so whereas I think even though I would preach how important health behaviors were, inevitably it shows you how life pulls you away from different values. I've always tried to be healthy, but when my career got busy and I had 3 children, my own health behaviors, like things like exercise, felt negotiable. And they felt like an added extra, that something I could do when I had time for it. And inevitably, when you have children and a career, you don't. So that was pretty much, something that kind of led me towards, okay, these health behaviors are not negotiable because I need to be here for these other things that I consider to be more important than me, like my children. So, I think something I wish myself is the continued priority of my own health as well as everybody else's.
I wonder, obviously, you having that scare, how do you view life now differently than you did before you had that diagnosis?
Oh, that's a great question. How do I view it differently? I probably view myself slightly differently. We talked at the beginning about this idea that you don't really know
Yes.
the depths of your own strength or courage until you get there. It was a really tough time, and my husband and I really pulled together. We've always kind of we have really different strengths, and we've always kind of used those strengths as almost like, 2 different arms on the same body type thing. We do different things, but to the same effort and with the same goal in mind. And we very much did that during that time, and it sort of pulled us closer together. So I think, I don't know if it sort of transformed how I see myself, but I discovered and unlocked strengths that I perhaps didn't fully appreciate I had before that experience. Doesn't mean you're not scared of that happening, the stuff like that happening again. It's terrifying, but I know I could pull out some of the tools that I used to get me through at that point. Yeah.
And how are you now?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Yeah, I'm just super, super lucky. So even though it feels unlucky that it happened, actually, if something like that has to happen to you, then I had the best case scenario. It was as early as we could possibly find it. I had surgery, and we're at the other side, and I didn't have to, thank goodness, have all the kind of radiation and stuff that kind of makes you really, really poorly in the process. So I consider myself super, super lucky for that. It's weird because you have this, when it happens and you get diagnosed, you have this sort of why me, sort of that natural tendency, I guess, that sort of why me feeling of, I've always tried to be healthy. I can't, what have I done to cause this? Why is this happening? But then equally, when you come out the other side and your oncologist says, go live your best life, you're done, you have that sense of why me, in terms of what have I done to deserve survival? There's people back there still fighting for their lives, or maybe a bit of kind of survivor guilt type feeling. So yeah, that was a kind of, I guess, interesting aspect of that experience that I didn't know would be a part of it.
Wow. And our final question, Julie, what is a life of greatness to you?
A life of greatness, one with purpose, and a purpose that's in line with your values. When you work out, and I think it's something you do gradually over time as an adult, you start to work out and you discover what matters most, and inevitably it's the things that have always mattered most. It's the people in your life, and it's your children and your partners and your family and the friends in your community, and everything else is sort of extra. That when you get to that point, whether you're faced with the prospect of your own mortality, or you get to the end of your life, those are the only things that matter. And I realized that going through that experience, that they were the only things I thought about. And so, yeah, I think for me then a life of greatness is the recognition of what really, really matters, and the recognition that they are the simplest of things that have always mattered most.
It's so true, though. I think, when you come to the end of your life, which inevitably will happen for all of us, people are not going to stand up at your eulogy saying, I remember when Julie Smith got 5 million likes on her Instagram video. They're going to say Julie Smith was an amazing mother and wife, and, she brought so much light into the world. Those are the things that people are going to remember you by, and that is so unbelievably important. And Julie, that is absolutely what you are doing. So thank you so much again for the wonderful conversation. Open When is available everywhere that you find books, and we'll put a link to it in this episode's show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.